If there's one thing that I really liked about Stillball Run, it would definitely be its like cast of characters. There were just so many fan favorites that jumped right out the page, like instantly. We're talking Gyro, Diego, Funny Valentine, you name it. If it's a character in Stillball Run, people generally like them. But there's one character in this absolutely fantastic cast that I think gets overshadowed a lot, and it's ironic because it's our main character, Johnny Joestar. Johnny Joestar is the main JoJo of Part 7 and is the alternate universe counterpart to Part 1's Jonathan Joestar. And although there can be a very few amount of similarities between the two, Araki has stated that if he were to write Jonathan as a more human character, Johnny would be the result of that. Which is interesting to say the least, as while Jonathan is undoubtedly a man of pure righteousness, Johnny can be seen as almost the complete opposite of this, fighting for his own selfish motives and having the will to kill in cold blood to reach his goals. And although many aren't really happy with this kind of character, I'm all for his moral ambiguity and it makes him more of a believable person, because although Johnny can be a bad person at times, he still has moments where he fights for good. He's still a Joestar and it's what his bloodline's known for. But in a way, it isn't. Let me elaborate on this point. Johnny is the first protagonist of the alternate universe. He is arguably the start of the main JoJo's in this universe. And that means the sense of righteousness that Jonathan had, and all the other Joestars that had, and what Johnny would soon have, didn't come from his bloodline. He's had to muster this courage and confidence from himself. And you see that at the start of Stillball Run. He isn't your average Joestar. Well, whatever you class as an average Joestar. He doesn't have the confidence, the will to continue, not even the secret technique or the stand. All he has is his former riding skills, and how will that help when your legs don't work? And whilst on the topic of the Joestars, let's focus on their signature birthmark. Every JoJo in the series has been depicted with this birthmark placed on the left side of their neck, all except Johnny. Don't get me wrong, he most likely has the birthmark, but the fact that no one really ever gets to see it shows just how alone and introverted Johnny was at the start of the story. So much to the point where he tried to hide a family trait. It may even be the birthmark brings back painful memories of Nicholas and George and tries to hide it to avoid any mention of it. Johnny starts from zero, but his blossoming character is what makes him so amazing. The fact that he can rise from such a dark place in his life is inspiring, and the way Johnny does it is integral to his character. Before we do get to his evolution, I'd like to talk about his design, which is fairly simple, like Jotaro's design, but it says so much about the character. Johnny sports a short-sleeved hooded top with a pattern that resembles a harness and a feather in the hood, along with star-patterned trousers, boots that are equipped with spurs, and his signature knitted cap. Starting with the top, there's obviously the connection to the horse riding, but if I were to go further with that, I'd see the harness pattern on his top, definitely alluding to how much Johnny is held back by the past. Just like how Jonah's braided hair can be seen as the chains of fate being bound to him, the harness is bound to Johnny, who is restrained by trauma and regret. Later on in Stillball Run, Johnny starts to wear heart-shaped accessories on his shoulders. I believe these show his growing friendship with Gyro and the growth of his confidence, not to mention they're on his shoulders, which are directly connected to the arms and hands, showing his growing trust in his own ability, which revolves around the nail bullets, something I'm also going to talk about a bit later on. The feather is very reminiscent of native headwear, which instantly creates a contrast between this native accessory and his very American background. And as the Americans and natives were in conflict around the time of Part 7, it's safe to say that this actually represents Johnny's inner conflict with himself. The recurring star theme on Johnny's outfit could show his connection to the Joestars with it showing the birthmark, but I'd like to take this a step further. Stars are often used to symbolize the presence of divine power or energy. This could foreshadow Johnny's encounter with the Holy Corpse and Jesus Christ, but it could even show us the connection with the spin, as that phenomenon itself is linked heavily to Christianity, and its energy is often associated with miracles as seen in the climax of the Wrecking Ball arc. As far as I know, the boots don't go any further than the connection with horse riding, but they look pretty good. I mean, those are some nice boots. And now for Johnny's knitted cap. On the surface level, you have the stars which I've mentioned previously, and the horseshoe on the head along with the image of a horse. Again, there's a link to Johnny's past as a horseback rider, but just like with most of the other pieces of clothing, we can go further with this. These parts of Johnny's cap are positioned at the front of the cap, possibly showing how all of his skills as a horseback rider got to his head in the past, and it sticks with him as a big mistake he made. The fact the horseshoe looks as if it's floating in the front of the cap is very similar to how a ghost floats easily. Django's past life is still haunting him to this day. I know that sounded way too fucking deep, and Araki probably didn't mean that. But hey, it's fun to imagine. What if? Anyway, the last thing I will mention about the cap is the holes at the back. Johnny's hair sort of sticks out and makes these odd pairs of horns. These horns are most likely used to show how Johnny is painted as a demon or devil by his family and his enemies. It may even be how he views himself. This makes a very nice contrast with the rest of his outfit, which I've described before can be associated with the link to the Holy Corpse. Overall, the outfit serves its purpose extremely well on the surface level, and has another layer to it, which is what I would expect from a main outfit of a main JoJo. Now let's talk about the stand that he does eventually get through the end of the corpse part, that being Tusk and its namesake, as it's also a very important part to Johnny's character. Now Tusk is a stand that heavily revolves around the spin, this technique of the Sapelli family. Its entire ability is almost useless without it. This reliance on a technique that Gyro taught Johnny represents Johnny's reliance on Gyro for most of Steel Ball Run due to his self-loathing and lack of confidence. Hell, Johnny's even classed as the side character at the start, as the manga states that Gyro is the main character in the early chapters of Steel Ball Run. He even uses phrases that directly call back to previous main JoJos. But through Gyro's lessons, Johnny is able to grow as a person, which I'll get to later as well, and eventually take the mantle of main character when Gyro is defeated by D4C Love Train. In a way, just like how the Joestars of the original universe carry on the will of their predecessors, Johnny ended up carrying on Gyro's will by mastering the spin and embodying his lessons to defeat Valentine. As for Tusk's namesake, Tusk is named after a song of the same name by Fleetwood Mac. Firstly, the song has a very native feel to it with its instruments, and just like the feather in Johnny's hood, this can represent his inner conflict. Only this time with the ability of Tusk, the conflict of such a phenomenal technique that Johnny can't seem to incorporate into a supposed useless ability. The song's lyrics have obviously had an effect on Johnny's character. All the questions in the song could allude to Johnny's self-doubt in his actions and abilities throughout the race. And as the song progresses, just as Johnny does, the lyrics become less of questions and more of commands, showing his resolute growth in himself. As for the individual lyrics, the song is quite focused on a relationship with unrequited love. This actually mirrors the relationship between Johnny and his father, George, who eventually fall out after an incident with Nicholas's boots before a race. Johnny still loves his father, but his father's words have scarred him deeply, and for a while to find who he is, just like the depressive man who clings on to the past. There are other lyrics that mirror Johnny well, such as Real Savage Like, which describe Johnny's brutality and dark determination. The song perfectly describes the evolution that Johnny has through the story and his growth as a character. Speaking of which, we should start talking about that. Johnny's development throughout Steel Ball Run is one of his most defining traits in comparison to the other main characters in the series, and his journey to being a better character is far greater than theirs, as the other JoJos are more explored characters rather than developed. So far, we've been scratching the surface with Johnny, but this is where we get deeper. To fully understand Johnny's growth, we have to go back to the beginning. Johnny was born into a wealthy family with high expectations from Johnny Joestar, his father, who saw him and his brother Nicholas as equestrian masters in the making. And thus, Johnny initially had a hard childhood, with all the pressure from his father trying to live up to Nicholas's legacy as an amazing horseback rider. On the topic of his brother, Nicholas was extremely friendly to Johnny, and it's clear at this point in Johnny's life, Nicholas is his only friend. Apart from Danny, the white mouse, whatever. Speaking of Danny, when the small animals found in the Joestar's dining room, George orders Johnny to drown the mouse, which is when Nicholas suggests to Johnny that he should let the mouse go into the woods rather than killing it. Johnny agrees, valuing Nicholas's opinion on the matter, letting the mouse go. It's clear to us that Nicholas is more of a guiding father figure than George is. George is more focused on the reputation of his family, whereas Nicholas cares more for his brother's feelings. But unfortunately, Nicholas, whilst riding a new horse in preparation for a race, dies from the horse going berserk at the sight of a single white mouse. Johnny sees this as Danny and blames himself for the death of the only one who loved him, and is forever shaped by the incident. This is the turning point for Johnny's character. This guilt for Nicholas is burdening him, as we see in the fight with Civil War. As for George, he is also an important figure in Johnny's life, as his clear favoritism in Nicholas creates a gap between the two. When Nicholas is gone, the gap is widened as George is still grieving for his lost son. We can see this when George refuses to give Nicholas his boots to Johnny. Speaking of this scene, this is where George finally destroys the final bond Johnny has with his family. George goes so far as to say that God, you took the wrong son. These words are forever etched into Johnny's memory, as this comment leads to what I believe to be Johnny's darkest moment, the formation of his ego. Johnny sees these words as a sign that he doesn't need to trust anyone anymore, which is exactly what leads to Johnny's loneliness after his disability. Speaking of which, the ego Johnny forms is an extremely arrogant one that for only a small amount of time grants him some form of happiness through ignorance. This fools him into thinking that he was better off this way, when in fact, it was what caused him to be crippled. After this point, Johnny is physically and mentally crippled. He is unable to stand on his own 2 feet in a figurative and literal sense. And that leads us to the Johnny we see at the start of Steel Ball Run. The moment where we meet JoJo in the series is the moment that Johnny revitalizes hope and going back to his former self when he witnesses the spin and its power. This is where Johnny's road to recovery starts, and it starts at lesson 1, do it if you have the willpower. At this moment in time, Johnny is absolutely determined in finding out the capabilities of the spin, and how they could help with the use of his legs. Through Gyro, he has crafted a will and determination to continue life with purpose. This will be a recurring theme, as Gyro is almost solely responsible for Johnny's growth through Steel Ball Run, yada yada yada. Johnny's second step in his growth is mainly shown in the manifestation of his stand ability during the fight with the Boom Boom family. But before we get onto the ability, I'm going to talk about the appearance of the stand, which we see in Wired. Act 1 of Tusk is a small creature that resembles an elephant in some form and is covered in stars. It has a sort of beak for a mouth and wears quite a somber expression. This shows the infant stages of Johnny's development, as the stand is obviously seen as some sort of baby mammal, almost like a fetus, and its lack of legs or mouth show how Johnny at this stage is still unable to find it within himself to stand on his own 2 feet and gain his voice. Its almost unfinished state shows us, however, that the stand doesn't stop there. Lesson 2 from Gyro is work those muscles, which at first seems very surface level, but it can be interpreted further. The spin is actually used to manipulate the human body, mainly its muscles, so training your muscles is directly linked to Johnny's road to recovery. Lesson 3 comes after Lesson 2 quite quickly, and its importance to Johnny's growth is extremely important, as I believe this is where we see fragments of Johnny's true confidence come to the forefront. Lesson 3 is Believe in the Spin. It seems very simple on the surface level, just like Lesson 2, but this is a wake-up call for Johnny. After the death of Nicholas, he hadn't had a positive relationship with anyone in his life. He's truly been alone, and he's now being asked to trust in some higher power that he believes he can't harness at this point. But the fact that he does believe in the spin and progresses tells us that Johnny's trust and overall relationship with Gyro is growing further. And not to mention, Johnny was in an extremely bad situation when this lesson was taught to him. He thought that he couldn't access the spin at the time. Benjamin Boom Boom had it covered, so when he imbues the spin with his nails and gains his stand, we know it's entirely on his own accord, showing us that Johnny is starting to believe in himself and others around him. A quick side note actually, both Gyro and Nicholas are both older mentor figures who have some ability that Johnny believes he can't use, when in fact Johnny eventually does become a good horseback rider and spin user. It goes to show that maybe Johnny sees Gyro as he did with Nicholas, and that's why their bond is so close. Mind you, Johnny is still an extremely pessimistic and self-loathing person at this point. He has developed, it's not a major breakthrough. We see some rather major steps taken in his fight with Sandman and his stand in a silent way. Here, Gyro tells Johnny about Lesson 4, Pay Your Respects. Through this lesson, Johnny learns of the golden ratio and how all forms of life embody this ratio. This can be seen as a metaphor for Johnny seeing the world in a new way, seeing how the world had beaten him to the ground multiple times, and now his abilities have a solid chance of going against his enemies. I wouldn't say it's too far of a stretch. On the topic of Johnny's ability, Tusk actually evolves into its second act in the fight, so let's discuss it. Tusk Act 2's design heavily differs from its previous act, as it sports a much more robotic, solid design, showing Johnny's growing physical and mental strength, and his ability to act more cold and calculated whilst under pressure, rather than letting his emotions get to him. Its facial expression is much more resolute than negative, which tells us that Johnny's starting to see some reason to continue. Somewhere within himself, Its new ability allows Johnny's nail bullets to travel through surfaces for increased range, though it only lasts for a few seconds. I can't really think of a way to link this ability for its growth. I can only think of that this extended range of the bullet shows how far Johnny comes since the start of his journey. I don't know, if you know, then please be sure to tell me in the comments or something, because I really don't have any idea what it represents. Also, speaking of just the primary ability of nail bullets, someone actually told me about this. When Johnny's using an ability, he's actually pointing at people, and that will be important for later in the Civil War fight. Just stay with me on this. I know I'm sounding absolutely insane. Just please stay with me on this. I also think it's important to note that Sandman, or Soundman, I'm not even sure myself, is an American native. And something we mentioned before with Johnny's character design is the native feather representing conflict for him. And the fact that Johnny's defeated Sandman in this fight shows he is starting to finally overcome his inner conflict, which had been highlighted as a big issue in that same fight. This is definitely one of the more major steps in Johnny's development, and it's not the last we see, because soon after, Johnny and Gyro encounter Sugar Mountain Spring and have to spend their newly acquired fortune before the sun sets. They have to do this whilst being chased by the 11 men that Valentine recruited to secure the corpse parts. Near the end of the fight, Johnny has a decision to make. He either gives away the corpse parts to the 11 men so that the curse Gyro has from Sugar Mountain Spring goes away, or he keeps the corpse parts, and lets Gyro succumb to the curse. And by choosing the former option, we see that Johnny isn't entirely self-centered. He can care for others, and his goals don't dictate who he is, which is actually a direct contrast to our main antagonist, Funny Valentine, whose personality can be perfectly summed up with complete and utter patriotism. And after Johnny does get Gyro back, we see one of the best moments in Steel Ball Run. How about we make a toast before we get our horses to what we've lost everything? These two bubbles of text perfectly encapsulate the dynamic between Johnny and Gyro. Gyro's attempt at an uplifting mood and Johnny's lifeless and pessimistic response. But in the end, the two were able to share a drink together in the cold winter. Johnny felt as if he'd made so much progress only to have it snatched away by the president. Or in his eyes, fate. It's important to remember that ever since the start, Johnny believes that all this misfortune is fate punishing him for his brother's death and his cocky attitude in his younger years. He truly believes that he deserves every bit of slack he gets. I feel like I could go deeper with this, but I just can't seem to find the connections, but I'm sure someone like, I don't know, Metty or Caleb can go further with this arc. I'm not going to go into lots of detail with Wrecking Ball because it predominantly focuses on the conflict between Gyro and Wicked People, but I really like the duality the two enemies have with our main duo, specifically Magenta and Johnny. The two obviously have similarities right off the bat, with wavy hair, negative attitude, and avid hat wearers, but I believe that if Johnny had let the pursuit of the corpse define who he is, then he would most likely be a character very similar to Magenta, and I think it really highlights the journey that Johnny's taken. Anyway, I didn't want to dive too deep in that. The video's going to be long enough as it is. After Wrecking Ball, we see the biggest obstacle Johnny has to face yet, that being his past. Now, before we get into Civil War, I'd like to focus on some attention to the chapter covers. I could make a whole video on the Steel War and chapter covers, but I think this was a very interesting case. Chapter 55's cover shows Gyro and Johnny on a saddle, both pointing their arms up to the sky with their respective weapons. Another pointing at the sky could foreshadow the entrance of Jesus into the story, but I want to point out something different. In the Chapter 55 cover, as I just mentioned, Gyro's pointing stretches out further than Johnny's, which is almost being shadowed by Gyro's. But in the next chapter cover, Johnny is at the forefront, alone, with his point to the sky equaling that of Gyro's. This represents that Johnny has now taken over the mantle of main character from Gyro, and although the two are equals now, the spotlight is on Johnny specifically. We could even see the rotation growing in the Chapter 56 cover, in contrast to the last one, showing his growing power and the arrival of a new act. But before getting to that, we have to discuss Civil War. Just like a lot of the Steel Ball Run cast, Johnny has had things from the past weighing him down, to the point where it seems to physically affect him, and now he has to confront his past and basically overcome it. This is the biggest hurdle that Johnny has ever had to overcome, arguably even more than the final fight with Valentine or Diego. You can even say that fate has brought Johnny and Axelrod together, two peoples whose lives have been destroyed by their past and are on the verge of recovery. Axl Rose's stand even supports the idea of him being fated to fight against Johnny, with one notable aspect of the design being the rooted legs, which you could directly link with Johnny's inability to walk. Anyway, that was way too deep. Johnny struggles at first. I mean, of course he does. The past has been haunting him for years now. The issue is that Johnny is faltering when he shouldn't. He just can't seem to find the strength to overcome his past. He's too held back by it. But luckily for Johnny, there's one man who is able to help him in this situation. Someone who can impart his teachings onto Johnny for the biggest obstacle yet. And that man is Jesus Christ. I know, if you haven't read Still Will Run, that seems ludicrous, but please stay with me. Jesus tells Johnny that if your heart is wavering, do not shoot, because then a new path will be open for you. Johnny sees that hesitation is absolutely unacceptable in this situation, and finds his dark determination. We saw that in the Manda arc, but Johnny has never really fully realized his true potential until now. Now his heart will no longer waver. From this point on, Johnny never hesitates to do something, and he's no longer internally conflicted, and through confronting his past, his stand evolves even further. It becomes Tusk Act 3. Starting with the new design, it still carries over that robotic theme that Act 2 had, but it's now much bulkier and has more developed limbs, especially the legs, which is very interesting, seeing as Johnny could actually walk after Act 3, but felt morally inclined not to. Although the robotic theme persists, Act 3 is now much more of a human shape, showing Johnny's growth, emotion, and resolve. I don't really have much to say about Act 3 that already hasn't been said about Act 2, so let's focus on the ability. A lot of people seem to be confused about Act 3's ability, as they think it's literally just Act 2's ability but upgraded. Firstly, it isn't even a basic upgrade. In fact, the stats for Act 3 are actually worse than Act 2. With the lower durability stat, its actual unique ability is to let Johnny travel within Act 2's bullet wormholes by shooting himself, something he could not do before. The fact he has to shoot himself to activate the ability shows his new unwavering resolve and courage, and shows that Johnny will no longer be internally conflicted, acting resolutely, which is perfect for the Civil War arc. At this point in the story, Johnny is finally taking the character of main character. It's grown so much with the journey. Basically, I've missed a point here, but the ability. I want to specifically focus on Johnny shooting himself, which I find really cool because, as I mentioned before, Johnny points when he uses his ability, right? See, pointing at people could show how he just wants to shift the blame onto other people, and how he's comparing himself to other people. But when Act 3 comes around, he's finally confronted his past, and he's ready to take the blame for himself and grow as a person, which I find to be, if that's intentional, that's fucking amazing. Like, honestly, that's really cool. Anyway, Johnny is about to get hit with the reality of his current situation. The reality being that President Valentine was so much stronger than Johnny or Gyro could have ever imagined, and it's because of dirty deeds done dirt cheap. It's in the Who Shot Johnny Joestar arc that we finally see just how much of a formidable opponent Valentine really is. At this point in the story, he almost went unmatched until Diego fights Valentine on the train, of course. His attack on Johnny attempted to absolutely shatter his confidence and to put someone like him in his supposed place. And it almost succeeds, with Johnny being gravely injured by multiple gunshots. But what Valentine didn't take time to consider is how far Johnny's come since the start. Despite the damage he's endured, he showed the will to endure and continue to retrieve the corpse from Valentine, even if the reasons for acquiring it are rather selfish. It truly is a testament to how far he's come, and as a reward, he's shown the golden spin, which allows him to harness infinite rotational energy. This will be important for the fight with Valentine. Speaking of which, we should start talking about that. Johnny and Gyro now have to square off against Valentine with the power of the full corpse love train, its ability to redirect all misfortune heading towards Valentine to its surroundings. In a sense, this ability represents how Johnny has viewed fate. To him, fate has favoured Valentine, the more just person, and redirects the misfortune to Johnny, someone who felt as if he didn't deserve good fortune. Yet again, this is a big hurdle for Johnny, as he's going against his idea of fate, something that is absolute and all-powerful, something he's feared for a long time. We even see this in part 5, fate being a really big theme in that. But before Johnny does take on Valentine, Gyro tries to take him down with the golden spin whilst Lucy is on his horse, and this is where Ball Breaker is revealed. Ball Breaker is a stand that is formed by the energy of Gyro's steel balls, and its only real ability shown is the golden spin it is formed from, and its energy is seen to dramatically age people and bypass Love Train. But due to Gyro keeping Lucy on his horse, the spin he used was imperfect, and Gyro ends up receiving a bullet wound in the stomach. Before Gyro attacks one last time, he tells Johnny his final lesson. The shortest route was a detour. In this lesson, Gyro is effectively telling Johnny that he is fully matured during his journey, and now has the power to use the golden spin. In life, Johnny was a bit of a spoiled brat, always relying on his economic status to get him out of situations, and even trying to use the boots of his dead brother to participate in a race. But in this journey, he realised that the true road to recovery had nothing to do with how much money he had or how he stood in society. It was a path where you had to work hard and take it upon yourself to change into a stronger person. The shortest path that Johnny was trying to take was just a detour in the end. And now he's going to finish the road to recovery by defeating Valentine. He gets his horse to kick him in the air, pose him in the form of a golden ratio, and evolve his stand one last time. Tusk Act 4 is the final evolution of Tusk, represented through its stand stats, which Act 4 has an E in development potential for. Its design is the most human out of the acts, having very human looking legs and arms, which show Johnny's maturity as a character, as do all the other acts. The lower chest of Act 4 is sort of a vestment with an oval pattern. I feel like this perfectly represents the ability of Act 4, which has the power to harness the golden spin to infinitely rotate every cell in your body. And seeing as animal cells are often oval shaped, in diagrams and stuff, it could be argued that there is a connection between the design and the ability. As I said for Act 2, I don't want to be repeating myself, as most of the acts have a recurrent theme, and all deliver the same message of Johnny's growth, so let's move on. Valentine tries to bargain with Johnny after his defeat, saying that if Johnny stops the rotation, he will bring Gyro back from another universe. This can be seen as a test for Johnny's maturity through the story. Will he give in to his desires, agree with Valentine, and die by his hands, or will he see through the act? In the end, Johnny does see through it, and kills Valentine with a nail bullet to the head. It truly shows how independent Johnny has become, being able to fully embody the teachings of Gyro without his assistance. Gyro's soul appears before him, saying his final goodbyes to his friend. Johnny suffers, but his fight with the President is finally over, and his road to recovery is now complete. He can now stand on his own 2 feet. But there's one thing left to cover, and it's the final hurdle in Johnny's journey in Steel Ball Run, and that hurdle is none other than Dio. Diego truly encapsulates the horrors of Johnny's past, and although it was addressed in the Civil War fight, Diego is the one remaining part of Johnny's past, apart from his father, who actually realizes the errors in his ways in the High Voltage arc, and truly admires the man that his son has become. This Dio is from another universe, so his stand isn't scary monsters, it's something much more sinister. It's the world. This is the first fight in Steel Ball Run where Johnny doesn't have the assistance of Gyro, and has to use what he has learned in his journey. And although the world isn't really linked to Johnny's development, it's a perfect way to show the conflict of the Joestars and Brandos, a conflict that spans universes, which I thought was a really nice touch. Despite Johnny's growth, he does lose to Dio, but in a sense, this was the final step to Johnny's evolution. We've seen with characters like Diavolo that trying to completely sever ties with the past doesn't exactly work out for the best. Johnny was destined to lose like his alternate universe counterpart, but the loss doesn't change him as a person, rather he moves on and continues with his normal life. The part doesn't matter to him, because he has recovered, he had redeemed himself. In a sense, that's what Steel Ball Run's about, redemption. All these people trying to get the corpse to make themselves better people, or to make up for mistakes in the past, but by using the corpse rather than trying to redeem yourself with your own strength, it can be seen as taking a shortcut, or in other words, a detour. Thinking about it now, maybe Jesus told Johnny not to waver because he knew there would be a risk of breaking the corpse, and it would make Johnny realize that he needs to redeem himself in his own strength. Even at the end of his life in JoJo, it isn't the corpse that redeems itself its actions, in fact it's the catalyst for them. It's his own willingness to sacrifice himself. Johnny was part of a race, but in the end, it was a roundabout path, and he's finally going home. I think everyone's been Johnny at some point. Someone who feels like they don't deserve anything good. And his redemption arc, now his realization arc, is truly some beautiful writing by Hirohiko Araki. This is why I love Johnny Joestar, and why he is an amazing character. Thank you for watching.